your insurance rate, if you have tenants, is cheaper if you inspect the tenants every 90 days. I would think similar to an alarm for glass breakage, that there's going to be alarms on your dishwasher, on your laundry room, anywhere there can be water, so that it's caught a lot earlier. And the strata councils will have the right to get
But
into
Bob,
their
this
suite.
is not only just the leak, it's to do with breakages, it's to do with new mailboxes, it's to do with a whole combination. That the insurance company now looking at, okay, now I'm gonna hike it. I'm just dealing with this right now, and we would like you to insure a whole entire building. But the cost was exactly, it went up to 45%.
We're at a transition period between being preventative and new competition, but it's scary right now.
It's scary, yeah.
Because this is brand new on our industry, and we have to be prepared to answer it when an investor buys here.
That's correct, yeah, it's a concern a little bit, so unless they do something like a safe fund and put in an investment and earn 19%, the strata has to have some sort of money set aside separate for insurance only, so it doesn't sort of, it's gonna be new rules, I think.
But I will say in Greater Vancouver, compared to other jurisdictions we work in America, that our strata fees are unusually low.
Yes.
So we've been keeping them so depressed so that we can falsely say how low they are, and then 2 years later, they've been jumping, but not enough.
Yeah,
So that's the other issue.
yeah.
We should move on to Ryan.
Okay.
Thanks,
Just
Bob.
one quick question. Are developers now building new buildings with things like alarms around the city?
If they weren't, it's something that when we're sitting with a developer on concept, as much as we need an Amazon room, because in America you get one box per day from Amazon per suite,
Yes,
and in Christmas it's free. So it's preparing for tomorrow.
yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening to me. I consider it an absolute honor that I can talk to you. Thank you. Now this one.
We'll let people know that there's stats on the screen so they can.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everybody. So honestly, Bob speaks so eloquently about demographics. I'm wondering if maybe the intelligence team should consider hiring him. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. As an economist, I always appreciate when I can get an audience, even if you're a captive one. I've got some slides here with a lot of data. I'm very happy to share that after today. And I know you guys are here for highlight. I do want to take a few minutes though.
Yes. Everyone's getting a package after.
Everyone, this is like, I feel like Oprah, you're all getting a package. You're getting a PDF.
Yeah, a PDF email.
PDF email, okay. So I want to take a few minutes and just talk sort of bigger picture about our market, share with you some of the things that we are looking at, we have been looking at over the past year, what we have our eye on for the year that's ahead. I think first off, we can all agree this market is super complex, very dynamic, right? Needless to say, we are not a Midwestern factory town from the early 20th century when the only thing influencing the demand for housing, the price of housing, is how many people are working at the local plant and what the going wage rate is, right? So there's a lot going on, and because of that, I think we can all agree that none of us fully understand all of the dynamics, how everything complements one another and interacts with one another in this market. If I'm wrong about that and someone out there does know that, I genuinely would like to speak to you after today. Now, having said that, we can speak with confidence about the things that matter most, okay? And they're traditional, they're maybe a bit boring, but I'm talking about economic dynamics, I'm talking about demographic changes, I'm talking about interest rates. And certainly the policy and regulatory environment matters a lot, but I don't have time for that today, so we'll talk about that another time. So I just want to share a few thoughts on where we're at in the market, what we're looking at. I want to start with a bit of a snapshot of the resale market and how we ended up finishing last year. I do think the resale market's a bit of a bellwether for the rest of the market, including pre-sale, because what's happening in the resale market reflects and also drives consumer sentiment and confidence. So with all that said, so here we go. So this is just looking back at the 12 months of 2019. Monthly sales are represented by that red line. We know we started the year off on the wrong foot. sales in 2018 throughout the year had been below what they were the previous year. Through the first 6 months of 2019, that was also the case. So 2018 sales are on there for this region in black. And so we had this, what we call this negative sales gap, right? Where the year-over-year sales were down, down, down. It drove the media headlines, and it really has influenced, did influence and had and is influencing still for some people their perception of the market when the right time is to buy. So during that first half of the year, sales were down year-over-year by 23%. Partway through the year, we saw something change, and really it was an evolution, and we had talked about it, and we saw it coming for a while because that sales gap that we identified was closing over time. And we knew at some point we were going to turn the tables and we were going to start to see increases over the previous year. Didn't quite expect how robust demand came back, but we did finish the year quite strongly with sales in the latter 6 months being up 37% over the final 6 months of 2018. So we had a good end to the year. The condo market in December, the number of sales was up 83% on a year-over-year basis. Inventory, similarly, as sort of demand resurfaced and buyers, would-be buyers who were sidelined, re-entered the fray, started to draw down some of that existing inventory. And so what we saw towards the end of the year was a year-over-year decline in our inventory. And now once again, when we look at where the total listings sit right now versus even our historical average, we're actually low. We're actually constrained in a historical sense on the supply side of things within resale. And so we have different dynamics within our marketplace as we enter 2020. I think we don't know how long this will last. We'll watch everything that's influencing the market, but it's definitely a better start to this year than we saw in 2019. So sales are up at the end of the year, and in fact, sales picked up so much in the latter half of last year that overall sales, total sales in this region, were up 1.5% over 2018. So it was a surprising and positive end to last year on the resale side. Why did that happen? Well, ultimately, something that we ignore very often, I said earlier that some of these underlying fundamentals for our market are boring. I think often they don't make headlines, but we continue to have an extremely well-performing local / regional / provincial economy. We look at our labor market, look at the unemployment rate over the past 5 years. We've been below some of our metro area peers, including Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto. We're below the Canadian average in terms of the unemployment rate, and we're still below 5% despite a little bit of an uptick more recently. We have this constrained labor market, and on top of that, we have a job vacancy rate of just under 5%. So in other words, employers are trying to fill jobs that they cannot fill. They cannot find bodies to sit at desks as an image, right? So that 4.8% is up by about a third over the last couple of years. This region has the second highest job vacancy rate in the entire country. So there's a bit of a signal there on the part of employers that they want to hire, they're looking for people, they can't find them, so that's a challenge now, but if they're here, they will hire them moving forward. So the dynamics within our labor market have been positive for workers. The red bars here show year-over-year wage rate increases. We had a question earlier about wages increasing, not keeping pace with inflation or house price inflation. More recently across the province, we've seen wages increase relatively robustly, so 4.3% on a year-over-year basis, much faster than what we had seen on an annual average basis over the previous 5 years, and about double what the rate of inflation is locally. So what that means is real inflation-adjusted incomes in this region are growing, which boosts aggregate purchasing power across the marketplace, which then obviously is a positive sign for our housing market. And then finally, when we look at our underlying population and how that's changing, BC in Q3, so that's the most recent data that we have, Q3 from last year, we added 34,000 people over that 3-month period ending in September. It was the second highest number of additions we've ever had in any quarter in, I would say, recorded history since we've been collecting data. Right? And that was driven primarily by migration, international migration specifically, both through immigration and through international students and temporary foreign workers. But the vast majority of that is actually permanent residents that are coming here. So we have these strong fundamentals as we head into 2020. You know, some of the metrics that we follow are more muted now than they were at the beginning of last year, but they remain positive, they remain cumulative. So all of the gains we made earlier last year are here, and we're building on those. Our population's growing, job base is growing, and wages are growing faster than inflation. So what are we watching as we look at the year ahead? So there's a few things we have our eye on. The first one is a little bit of a headwind for our market. When we look at the inventory of completed but unsold condos in this region, we can see that this is a monthly snapshot of the inventory in a particular month. So over the past year, roughly, that inventory of available condos that have not sold is about double what it was in the prior year. So that's de facto competition for pre-sales. Now, two things about this. I think one, we need to put this into historical perspective. So when we look at it on a year-over-year basis, that's one thing. When we look at it over the longer term, we see that we're not in an extreme supply environment in this respect, right? In the teens, in the 90s, we saw periods where we had a lot more available inventory that would have, especially in this more recent period, competed with pre-sale products. So this is a challenge right now. Going forward, it's something we're watching. We don't think in the next couple of years we're going to see a significant change to the stock because a lot of the stuff that will be completing in the next couple of years was sold out. So I think what we've got our eye on is longer term 2022, 2023, sounds weird to say those years, where we have projects that launched in the last year or so that will be nearing completion. And I think what we'll really watch is what happens in that resale market. If the demand remains robust, then what we're going to see is some of this inventory be cleared out over the next few years, and we'll see some of that potential new unsold inventory be drawn down before projects that launched in the last year complete, you know, in 2 to 3 years from now. The other stuff we're watching is generally quite positive for this market. Bob talked about immigration and why the Canadian government is increasing its immigration targets, which we will hit. We have more people that want to come here than we allow in currently. We can open the floodgates even more if we can process the applications. So up to 350,000 immigrants in Canada within the next 2 years. BC gets 15% of those immigrants, and this region gets 90% of BC. So we get about 14% in this region of Canada's immigrants, and this represents an opportunity for our workforce, but we also need to house them. So there's a lot of additional housing demand that comes along with these elevated levels of immigration above what we would see otherwise. When we look at the interest rate environment, inflation, so just general consumer price inflation over the past few years has been very, very moderate. And that is why the Bank of Canada has, one of the main reasons why it's maintained its target rate. That's the short-term rate, primarily impacts things like variable mortgage rates, around at 1.75. They haven't made a change in almost a year and a half. And the outlook for that, if we look at the survey, sort of the big banks, the consensus is there might even be a quarter-point cut. So on average, that's what they're predicting in 2020. Bond rates, if we look at 5-year Government of Canada bond yields, which reflect things like expectations about economic growth, inflation, and that sort of thing, they're low, and we don't expect them to increase much from the current level. They've fallen by about 45% from their peaks about a year ago, and so they remain quite favorable. That has pulled down our mortgage rates, and I think we're going to continue to see a favorable lending environment over the next year. And I promise you, over the medium term, what we're going to see is interest rates that remain lower for longer. There's very, very little that is actually applying upward pressure on rates. So that aspect of our market bodes well for us. And then finally, we talk about pent-up demand a lot. It's very, very hard to measure. So one way we can look at that is by looking at how much stuff is transacting in our marketplace relative to the size of our population. So in November, it's the latest data we have for sales and population. So in November, across the entire region, there were 1.67 sales per 1,000 people living in this region. Typically, if you look at the past decade average for November, we'd see 1.75. So it's about a 5% difference. If we look back over the remainder of 2019, going back to January, what we see is that our per capita sales ratios were way below what the historical norm was. So even if these ratios in 2019 moved up to just the historical average, we would have had 13,000 more sales in the resale market across the region in 2019, which would have been about a 35% increase. Okay, so what we are seeing now is the gap between that historical average and what's actually happening now close. And I think we will continue to see that as people reemerge from the sidelines and participate in our marketplace again. So just to wrap up, this is the quick and dirty on all of this. We're entering 2020 with some momentum carried over from 2019. There's a lot of exciting things going on. Our economy remains strong. Our population continues to grow. And even more locally, Metrotown, it's a regional town center that the City of Burnaby and Metro Vancouver, our regional government, have targeted as a high growth area. Burnaby is expected to grow by 50,000 people over the next 20 years. That's 2,500 people a year. We know that the mall is being redeveloped over the longer term to add 15 to 20,000 homes. And Metrotown now, within the most recent local area plan, has been designated as the downtown core for the city. So Metrotown is maturing and it will continue to. It's a great opportunity, obviously, right now to get in before it has matured and everybody knows what Metrotown will be. And generally speaking, we're quite positive about the market. We're watching a lot of different things, and having said all that, when I'm done here, feel free to come up and ask questions. Thank you very much.